So welcome everybody to our second session of Aging Through the Ages. It was great having you all last week, and I so look forward to having you. I hope that you get a lot out of what we're going to do this week. And this week in particular, we're going to be talking about healthy living and healthy aging. But before I get started, I want to share an anecdote of something that happened with me today. I went to the hairdresser, and the pharmacy called her and she needed to call in a prescription for the shot that she gets for her eye, which I know from my mother's experience usually has to do with macular degeneration. And so we got to talking about our aches and pains. And all of a sudden she whispered in my ear, "Old age." And I thought, okay, you want to come to my class tonight? It was just so funny. It was just so timely. So we've got a few more people on, and I say hello to you all. And I'm going to, the share screen is now available for both Rabbi Perlman and Susan when you're ready to do your presentation. So the quote that we have this week is related to healthy living and healthy aging. And it comes from the book of Psalms, and it is, "The span of our life is 70 years, given the strength, 80 years. So by the time Psalms were written, we have now gone from Methuselah living 900 years to Abraham living 175 years, to Moses living 120 years, to what is probably in ancient times a significantly older person, but still an achievable lifespan. Rabbi, would you please lead us in a blessing for Torah study?
Of course. So if everybody could just unmute and we can say the bracha together. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu mitzotav v'tzivanu
Asek b'dvar Torah.
Blessed are you, Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with your commandments and commanded us to study and engage and grapple with the words of Torah. Amen.
Amen. Thank you.
Please mute.
Please mute. Okay, today's agenda. We're going to do a brief review of the last class, and then we're going to get into this week's topic, which is healthy living and healthy aging. And I'm going to look at the biblical themes, which in my world are lifespan and quality of life matter. I'll be looking at the role of righteousness. I'll be looking at themes from the book of Psalms and the wisdom of the book of Ecclesiastes or Kohelet. Susan Castle will again be looking at contemporary approaches related to healthy living and healthy aging. And Rabbi Perlman will then lead us in a discussion of the rabbinic and spiritual wisdom related to our topic. And then hopefully we'll have time for a summary and Q&A. If not, we're all available, of course, on email or whatever for any questions that you might have. In our last class, we addressed aging, I would say more at a macro level, and from a biblical, as opposed to the more individual level, which we're going to be looking at tonight. From a biblical perspective, we learned that a fixed lifespan is what makes us human. We learned about the role of the Zakenim in the Tanakh. We learned that the general biblical policy is that the Zakenim are to be respected, and that the respect for Zakenim is a key element in maintaining the fabric of society. And when the Zikanim are not respected, it could possibly and does often lead to chaos. We also learned that the policy of respecting the Zikanim is actually makes us holy beings. Susan, from a modern perspective, taught us that the demographic growth of the population of older adults, she taught us about that and the factors that have contributed to that growth. She taught us about how American society has viewed older adults from an individual and policy level, including issues of ageism and federal protections for older adults. Rabbi Perlman instructed us from the Mishnah and the Talmud and the words of the rabbis, and she discussed the fact that God did not create aging until Abraham requested it, that aging is a blessing, that aging often leads to wisdom, and that aging is a crown of glory and something one should look forward to. I'm going to talk about physical aging and the biblical themes, and in this case, the role of righteousness. In the Tanakh, as I described a little bit last week, there are two terms for older people, Zikanim and Seva. Seva is the less common term for describing old age. It sometimes means gray-haired or hoary-headed. And then, as Rabbi Perlman explained to us, there is a proverb that reads, Ateret tiferet seva b'derech tzedakah timatzeh. Gray hair is a crown of glory. And the second half of that verse is, it's attained by the way of righteousness. The term seva is also found in the phrase b'seva tova, to a ripe age. And the patriarch Abraham is an example of one who lived b'seva tova. In the book of Genesis, God chooses Abraham to be the patriarch of his new people. And he promises him, even before his name is changed to Abraham, so he promises Abram, know well that your offspring shall be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and they shall be enslaved and oppressed 400 years. But I will execute judgment on the nation that they shall serve, and in the end they shall go free with great wealth. As for you, he says to Abraham, God says to Abraham, you shall go to your ancestors in peace. You shall be buried at a ripe old age. So as the primary, as the progenitor of the people, we know that God saw special qualities in Abraham. And one of the qualities that we're given to understand that God saw was Abraham's righteousness. It's reflected in many of Abraham's actions. For instance, when he welcomed the angels into his tent, and so he fulfilled the mitzvah of welcoming guests. And when he argued with God about Sodom and Gomorrah, and it was an argument out of a sense of his relationship with God and out of a sense of righteousness, that while there's evil in the world, not everybody should be punished for it. I won't even get into the story of the Akedah because that's a whole another ball of wax, so to speak. But we have to understand that from a biblical standpoint, Abraham was a righteous person. And so the description of Abraham's death reflects the reward for a life of righteousness. It says, this was the total span of Abraham's life, 175 years, and Abraham breathed his last, dying at a good ripe age, old and contented, and he was gathered to his kin. So the concept of a righteous person leading a good life and a long life and a rewarded life is, I would say, the more normative concept in the Bible. That also suggests that those who are not righteous will be punished. It is the part of the philosophy of part of the Bible, and we can't get away from that. But there's nothing wrong with rewards for righteousness. And while in biblical text, righteousness definitely was a reflection of a person's relationship to God and God's commandments, I think if we wanted to take a very modern view, we could also look at things like care for our environment, care for our body, care for others as elements of righteousness. And so even in the modern world, if we want to live to a ripe old age, we have to have all of those things. I mean, we don't have to have, but it's a benefit to us and to others to be righteous in our own ways and in our own approaches to the modern world. Okay. The Bible looks at lifespan and quality of life and does conclude that quality of life matters. And we see this in two different texts that I'm going to be talking about now. One of them is the book of Psalms, and one of them is the book of Kohelet or Ecclesiastes. And from our own personal experiences, I'm sure that each of us knows that the issue of lifespans and the quality of our lives is a human concern that we sometimes struggle with on a daily basis, but certainly it's always in our consciousness. Fortunately, the Tanakh is sensitive to our human concerns. We find this, I think, particularly in the book of Psalms, the book of Psalms themselves speak to our personal as well as Israel's national relationship with God. I would argue that the Psalms are perhaps the most personal of all the biblical texts. And many of us may be most familiar with them because they're included in our daily prayer books and our Shabbat prayer books, in the Hallel, which we recite on the holidays. And we rely on them at the most trying of times. For example, the 23rd Psalm, the Lord is my shepherd, which is recited at funerals. So the Psalms are all poetry, and some of them are very difficult because for our modern world, because some of them speak to God's anger, and some of them speak to God's concern with God's punishments, but some of them also praise God. So one of the Psalms that has a concern with length and quality of our lives is Psalm 39. And the quote which I have here is, "Tell me, O Lord, what my term is. What is the measure of my days? So I would know how fleeting my life is." This was written thousands of years ago, possibly in the days of the Second Temple, or probably even later. And it just reflects the same concerns that we have. The psalmist is particularly looking at his life, the psalmist's life, as opposed to God's eternal nature. And again, well, let's go to the second, and then second quote, and then I'll speak a little further. The second quote comes from the Psalm 90, and it says that the span of our life, this is where the original quote comes from, the span of our life is 70 years, or given the strength, 80 years. But the best of them are trouble and sorrow. They pass by speedily, and we are in darkness. Clearly not a very positive position. And often the psalmists are in such great distress that they're calling out to God to relieve them of their distress. And here the psalmist essentially is saying, we do have all this time, but it's not positive time. And then the psalmist says to God, who can know your furious anger? Your wrath matches the fear of you. Again, biblical language. We have to understand that within the context of the Bible, this is how people felt within the context of the ancient world, and even in the context of the modern world, that there are those who believe that God can be very angry and angry with them. And how are they going to get past God's anger? And that God's anger will be will result in punishment. It's not the way we generally want to feel about the text. And I don't think it's the way that many of us feel about the text right now, but it is a plea from the soul. So I'm sure that many of us have felt this sense of trouble and sorrow and darkness in our lives. And so the Psalms, although we may not want to deal with the issues of God's anger, they do speak to the dark places that we come from. There are also Psalms, however, which we're not going to deal with right this minute, that speak to God's greatness, to speak to the beauty of the world. And so they reflect the wide panoply of human emotion, and they're wonderful poetry. Sometime we should have a class or something about the Psalms, Rabbi. And so the psalmist finishes these stanzas by saying, "Teach us to count our days rightly, that we may obtain a wise heart." Here, despite all of the trouble that this psalmist is feeling, there is a sense of hope. There's a sense of that one can help oneself. And there's a sense that there may be a way to live one's life where one is fulfilled, that the quality of this person, that the psalmist's life mattered to the psalmist, and the psalmist had some desire to make that life a life of goodness. So while the questions asked by the psalmist are representative of the human condition, as I said, we must recognize that they are written in a religious context that reflects absolutely a belief in the existence of an eternal God, as well as an understanding that human fate is in God's hands. And now I'm going to move to a much different text in the Bible, and again, or in the Tanakh, and again, the beauty of the Tanakh is that there is such a wide range of thinking and approaches to human issues throughout the many books of the Tanakh. And so right now, the following two quotes, reflecting on the length and quality of our lives, come from the book of Ecclesiastes, Kohelet, which, like the Psalms, is found in the third section of the Tanakh, otherwise known as the Ketuvim, or the writings. Ecclesiastes falls in a category known as wisdom literature. So the Bible has offers many different types of literature, whether it's prophetic literature, the legal literature, proverbs, the narratives. All of those are considered biblical literature. And wisdom literature is generally considered to be somewhat later in biblical thinking and biblical writings. And essentially it includes two categories. There's the conventional wisdom that asserts that human action has consequences, and that good people are rewarded and bad people are punished for their behavior. And that would in fact be reflected in the Psalms. There's also skeptical wisdom, which rejects the notion of reward or punishment for individual behavior in the world or the world to come. Skeptical wisdom, some of the tenets are that all men are subject to the same fate, all humans. God is capricious and sets up unknowable systems. The human condition is one of frustration. Perhaps one of the more famous books in wisdom literature is the Book of Job, and Ecclesiastes or Kohelet is also a wonderful book, and closer to, I think, to the skepticism that we feel in the modern world, closer to the existentialism that we feel in the modern world. But both schools of wisdom focus on resolving practical problems of an individual's everyday life. The final chapter of Kohelet presents a vivid and moving description of old age. It's in poetry, and the metaphors are, to me, breathtaking. So appreciate your vigor in the days of your youth, before those days of sorrow come, and those years arrive of which you will say, I have no pleasure in them. Before the sun and light and moon and stars grow dark, and the clouds come back again after the rain. When the guards of the house, which is a metaphor for the arms, become shaky, and the men of valor, a metaphor for the legs, are bent, and the maids that grind the teeth grow few, are idle, and the ladies that peer through the windows, the eyes grow dim, and the doors to the street, the ears are shut, with the noise of the handmill growing fainter, and the song of the bird growing feebler, and all the strains of music dying down. When one is afraid of heights, and there is terror on the road. For the almond tree, I mean, just to stop at this point, who can't help but relate, Eden, hopefully not, but who amongst us are of a certain age and can't help relate to this either on our own terms or looking at older family members or older friends. It's a striking piece of writing that just puts it all in right there in one place in a few words. So the author of Kohelet continues, for the almond tree may blossom, meaning, of course, that the almond tree looks like it's dead in the winter, but then revives. And the grasshopper, which is actually a certain kind of plant, be burdened, and the caper bush may bud again. But man sets out for his eternal abode with mourners all around the street. Before the silver cord, which may refer to the spine or the nervous system, snaps, and the golden bowl, which may refer to the cranium, crashes, the jar is shattered at spring. So all of this is poetic life, poetic language for the end of life. And the dust returns to the ground as it was, and the life breath returns to God who bestowed it. It's just what to me is so incredible about this text is that it was written such a long time ago, and it was written by someone that we don't know, but somehow or other, that person in that time had some of the same kind of thinking that we have now and was not afraid to address it. And so gives us an opportunity to face our own concerns. But Kohelet, in addition to giving us this extremely expressive poem, also gives us a prescription for healthy living. And this is basically Kohelet's philosophy. For he who is reckoned among the living has something to look forward to. Even a live dog is better than a dead lion. Since the living know they will die, but the dead know nothing, they have no more recompense, for even the memory of them has died. Their loves, their hates, their jealousies have long since perished, and they have no more to share till the end of time and in all that goes on under the sun. So go, eat your bread in gladness and drink your wine in joy, for your action that was long ago approved by God. Let your clothes always be freshly washed and your hair never lack ointment. Enjoy happiness with a woman you love all the fleeting days of your life that have been granted to you under the sun, all your fleeting days. For that alone is what you can get out of life and out of the means you acquire under the sun, meaning out of the, essentially that your income, your wealth, and what you can achieve through your work. Whatever it is in your power to do with all your might. For there is no action, no reasoning, no learning, no wisdom in Sheol, the underworld, where you are going. So essentially, Kohelet says, live well, drink well, enjoy your days on earth because that's what you have. And this is a philosophy. Just very quickly, it's important to note that Kohelet was probably written for a middle class or upper middle class group of people. So much of what Kohelet says has to be understood in that context. And so there are many people who might want to accomplish what Kohelet is asking, but might not be able to. And then we have to keep those people in mind. So in sum, it seems to me that there are at least 3 biblical approaches to physical aging and healthy living: righteous living, appealing to God, and living well. And now I'm going to turn over to Susan.
Okay, well, thank you, Annette. The last class, I shared the concept that aging reflects the physiological process as well as attitudes, beliefs, and behaviors. And as Annette talked about health, a long life and quality of life, we strive for a long life of happiness, meaning, and good health. And today I'd like to talk about healthy lifestyles and healthy aging from an evidence-based perspective. But first, what do we mean when we talk about health, healthy aging, well-being? So I brought up the definitions. Well-being is the state of being happy, healthy, or prosperous. Health is a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease and infirmity. And healthy aging is a continuous process of optimizing opportunities to maintain and improve physical and mental health, independence, and quality of life throughout the life course. So let's talk about aging and some common misconceptions. But first, I'll let me talk a little bit about aging itself. So growing older can mean moving slower or getting tired faster than before. And age-related muscle loss actually begins around after age 30. An estimated 7 to 12% of the US older adults are considered frail, and the incidence rises with age and may even exceed 45% in the oldest old. We know that 1 out of 4 older adults falls each year, and that approximately 85% of older adults have at least 1 chronic condition and 60 have at least 2. And by chronic conditions, it could be high blood pressure, it could be osteoporosis, arthritis, diabetes. Those would all be considered chronic conditions. So what are some misconceptions? Well, older adults do become weak and frail. Falls are a normal part of aging, and chronic conditions are unavoidable. But the reality is, being frail is a diagnosed medical condition. It's not an age, and it's not inevitable. frailty is more than just becoming slower and weaker. And some older adults never become frail, such as 65-year-olds are frail. Some are frail and some 95-year-olds are not. But the signs of frailty can be obvious, and concerns should always be discussed with the health professionals. And studies show that physical activity, walking, and strength training can improve muscle function at any age, including the oldest old. So falls are common, especially over 65, but they can be prevented. Steps can be taken include talking about a history of falls and fear of falls with a healthcare provider. Fear of falls in itself could limit people in what they want to do. People become fearful of doing more, walking more, getting out, and in itself can lead to weakness and poor balance and function. So fear of falling is a concern too. And prevention of falls is about being active and exercising, keeping a home safe by reducing fall risks in the environment, and even participating in evidence-based fall prevention programs. And many of those are available through senior centers and area agencies on aging. So chronic conditions, well, we see that a lot of older adults have them, but they can be prevented or delayed with healthy behavior, such as good nutrition, exercise, adequate sleep, and reducing risk factors. And also there are programs to participate in to manage chronic conditions, such as chronic disease self-management programs, which are evidence-based. So cognitive health is the ability to think clearly and learn and remember. Normal brain aging may mean slower processing speeds and more trouble multitasking and mild decreases in attention, but routine memory skills and knowledge are stable, and it's thought they may even improve with age. Some misconceptions that people might have are that Alzheimer's disease will affect the majority of older adults. Older adults have a hard time learning new things. Older adults will lose the ability to function at a high level. And I think back to the video that you might recall from last week from AARP with the millennials trying to teach older adults something new, which was pretty funny. And they themselves were taught something by the older adults. But in reality, dementia is more common as people get older, but they're not inevitable. And many people 90 and older have no signs of dementia. And this is an interesting study, is that although the number of cases is rising as the older adult population increases and lives longer, there's also been research showing that the prevalence of dementia among those 65 and older has been declining. And growing research shows the brain maintains the ability to change and adapt so people can manage new challenges, new skills, and improve vocabulary and language. And I think many of us have during the pandemic have learned new skills with technology, with Zoom, and among other things. Studies show older adults have larger vocabularies, are better problem solvers than younger adults, and have learned from life experience and have accumulated knowledge. So cognitive activity, physical activity, and social engagement are associated with better cognitive function in older adults. So about 25% of older adults in the US live alone as of 2019, and studies show that loneliness and social isolation are associated with higher rates of physical and mental conditions, including depression. But social isolation is not the same as loneliness. And social isolation is the physical separation from other people, and loneliness is that subjective feeling of being alone or separated. So a person can be alone and not feel lonely, and a person can also feel lonely and be surrounded by other people. So a misconception may be that depression is a normal part of aging, but it's not. Depression is not considered a normal part of aging, and treatment helps. Older adults, which can include counseling, can include medication and other forms of healthcare. But studies show that older adults who are engaged in meaningful and productive activities tend to live longer, maintain their well-being, and may even improve their cognitive function. And studies have shown that most older adults feel satisfied with their lives, despite perhaps having more illnesses or physical problems than younger adults. Global research, this is global, not just US, it shows our greatest happiness is at the beginning and end of the lifespan, and it's known as the happiness curve. You might have seen this before. And that's the happiness curve. So it's seen globally, and taking away other factors. This is what has been determined. So healthy behaviors and whole health. Healthy behaviors and reducing risk factors can help us improve and maintain our health as we age. Studies report that less than a third of our longevity is genetic based. The rest is environment and lifestyle. So we can look at healthy lifestyle as a holistic approach to healthy aging. Overall, what is good for our physical health is also beneficial for our mental health, social well-being, our sexuality, and our mobility, function, and independence. And of course, healthcare has a portion to play in this too, is that accessibility to healthcare. It's important. So it's always important to consult with medical providers for healthcare. The screenings, treatments for acute and chronic conditions, questions, concerns, and lifestyle changes. So what are the healthy behaviors? And I'm sure many of you know most of these, if not all of these, but I will go over them because they are so important and are evidence-based. Nutritious diet, maintaining an optimal weight, physical activity and exercise, and I add in natural activity, because when we think about physical activity and natural activity, it's that going outside and doing a little bit of gardening, walking down to the mailbox, doing laundry in the house. It's that movement that we do during the day and not just sitting still. It's important to have moderate alcohol, to limit alcohol, not to smoke. We know this from a public health standpoint, getting enough sleep. I think during the pandemic, we've heard more and more about how sleep is so important because many of us have had disrupted sleep. So again, there's a lot of studies on the importance of sleep, as well as the importance of reducing stress, having a circle of family and or friends, in a positive circle of family and friends. It's our positive thinking and view on aging. So you can think back to not to absorbing the
Nathan, where's, what's his name?
Can you put on, can you mute, please?
And having a sense of purpose and meaning in life has been shown to also be very important for a healthy life and healthy aging. And there are also studies on belonging to a faith-based organization or having a spiritual component. There's actually studies that show that there's decreased depression for those who belong to a faith-based organization. And that's probably a lot to do with the sense of community and friends and meaning, purposefulness. So healthy behaviors reflect the Jewish principle of Shmirat HaGuf, caring for our body. And Rabbi, you can correct your pronunciation when you're on next. But it's nice to see that, as you know, we listened to Annette, that
nothing to correct, Susan. You got it. You hit it.
Thanks. I can't see anyone's faces, so I have to hope that I have it quite right. So and as Annette talked about, about being rewarded for ripe old age and righteousness is about caring for the body, environment, and others. And so many of these are caring for the body and as well as for others. In terms of, I like to bring up this acts of kindness. Doing nice things for other people are an effective way of proving our well-being. And nice things can be small, and they're found to be more effective if a reward is not expected. So a thank you and acknowledgement is not expected. That's even a bigger reward for ourselves in the sense of well-being. And volunteerism, I wanted to point out as well. Studies have shown that it reduces, along with helping the person that we're helping, it's a win-win situation in the sense that volunteerism reduces stress and increases positive, relaxed feelings in the person who's volunteering, improves physical and mental health, lowers rates of depression and anxiety, increases social interaction and may expand our social network, provides a way to build professional skills, provides a way to stay connected after retirement, provides a sense of purpose, and increases happiness and self-satisfaction. And here, whoops, what happened there? And we can look at that as acts of kindness reflect the Jewish value of
That's it.
loving kindness. And so
Haven't done it. The other day I was doing it and it says.
Everybody mute, please.
and so there we are, righteousness, caring for others. So I'm happy to, when we finish up, to answer any questions, but I just wanted to bring in all those things that are of the importance of healthy behavior and what we can do to really care for ourselves, and so that we have a healthy aging, and that we have the choice to go ahead and have to incorporate healthy behaviors in our everyday life.
Thank you, Susan. I think Kohelet would have might have given the same slideshow as you. Rabbi Perlman will now talk to us about rabbinic and spiritual approaches to healthy aging.
Thank you, Annette.
Am I off sharing?
Yeah, I think you're still screen sharing.
Okay.
Great, thank you, Susan. I'm really struck by how interesting both Annette and Susan's presentations were, in that some of the themes that I'm going to talk about in the rabbinic literature are the same as the modern themes, and the biblical themes doesn't surprise me, but certainly as the modern themes. So I'm not so sure if it's always the same or just our outlooks are similar, but I'm really, I was just really blown away by that. So the rabbis in the Mishnah and the Talmud have a lot to say about living well. So many midrashim and many of our daily prayers are based on the idea that we should live well, which includes taking care of our physical selves, as well as our spiritual, our emotional, and our psychological selves. And the guiding idea for the rabbis from the Talmud, from the Mishnah and the Talmud, is that you can't live well if you don't embrace all aspects of living, and that includes aging. So let's take a look at some earlier rabbinic sources. Okay, so the first one comes from Vayikra Rabbah, which was written in the 3rd century. And once Hillel the elder, at the end of a session with his students, walked along with them. Walked along the way with them. Rabbi, they asked, "Where are you going?" "To perform the will of my Creator." "What are you going to do?" "To bathe in the bathhouse." "Is that a divine precept?" they asked. "Yes, it is," he said. "Consider the following. The one who takes care of the statue of the king that stands in theaters and circuses, who cleans and polishes and makes offerings of food to it, is ennobled in its company, and by this service to the king. Insofar as we are created in the divine image, we must take care of ourselves." Hillel is an elder, and he is focused on following the mitzvah of taking care of himself. And more important, he's setting a great example for his students. Don't forget, the rabbis in the time of the Talmud, they spent most of their time in the Beit Midrash, in the study hall, poring over the ancient texts. Well, maybe for them, they weren't as ancient as they are for us, but they also knew that it was important to get out there and to do something physical for themselves. For the rabbis, who were scholars, who spent their lives sitting and studying, life is more than just studying. They knew that you had to take care of yourself. And this was also considered a mitzvah, that you have to take care of your physical body. So let's look from a reference from the Talmud that teaches us that long life is a result of healthy living and maybe even healthy aging. So this is from the Talmud in Talmud of Tractate Megillah. Rabbi Judah the first, who was the patriarch, the Nasi, asked Rabbi Joshua ben Korcha, how did you manage to reach such a long life? And Rabbi Joshua said, do you begrudge me the length of my life? And Rabbi Judah said, my inquiry is concerned with Torah, whose precepts for long life it is necessary for me to learn. And Rabbi Joshua said, in my life, I have never gazed at the countenance of a wicked man. So again, we have here an older rabbi teaching a younger rabbi about aging. And Rabbi Joshua's response might strike us as a bit odd. First, he wants to know if the younger colleague begrudges him his long life. And this in itself is interesting. Did the younger rabbi think that the older rabbi didn't deserve to live so long? And this was probably relative because people, although we have in the Bible, people are living a really long time. In the Talmud, age of the Talmud, people didn't, you were considered old when you were 60 if you lived that long. And also, is this a usual thing? Do younger people sometimes begrudge older people? Do they lose their patience with them, whether it's a family member or somebody who's in line in front of us or someone who's driving in front of us on the road? Do we tend to lose our patience with them? And what about the end of Rabbi Joshua's response, that he never gazed at the face of a wicked man? I think Rabbi Joshua is saying something that feels very psychologically true. When we look at another person, we often see ourselves reflected in them. So for Rabbi Joshua to say that he never gazed at a wicked man's face, I think he's saying that when he sees himself reflected in someone else's face, he may see a lot of things, but he never sees wickedness. He doesn't see himself as wicked, reflected in the face of the other person. And this is a beautiful way for to live. According to the rabbis, we should live in a way that allows us to see the best in ourselves, because we can see, when we see the best in others, we see the best in ourselves. And this is one way to ensure long life, according to the rabbis, to live a life where we see the best in people when we look at them, because then we see our best selves reflected in their eyes. And so while we need to embrace all parts of life, the rabbis also understood that we're human and that we have our fears of growing old. Turn to the third source. The third source comes from, why is this not working? Comes from Shema Kolenu, hear our voice, which is a prayer that we say on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur in the Musaf service. And this is a line that comes from Psalm 71, verse 9. Al tashtichenu le'et zikna, kichlot kochenu al ta'azvenu. Do not cast us away as we grow old. Do not desert us as our energy wanes. First of all, I love this for so many reasons, not the least of which is my father, may he rest in peace. I remember him always talking about this, and this is going back a long time, coming up on my father's 45th yahrzeit this summer. But he always talked about al tashtichenu le'et zikna. He always had that feeling that he didn't want to be left. He didn't want God to abandon him in his old age. And I can remember him talking to my mother about that on the high holidays. Of course, my father was not cast out in his old age because he died young, and that is one way to beat aging, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it. We say a version of Shema Kolenu every day in the Amidah, 3 times a day. After we complete all our personal requests, we ask that God watch over us, keep us safe, give us health, sustenance, and financial security. And in our liturgy, it's customary that either before or after our list of requests, that we ask God to hear our prayers. In the new Siddur, Lev Shalem, that we just started using a few weeks ago, it teaches that the words Shema Kolenu try to pierce the silence that surrounds us when we say the Amidah. We're trying to provoke a response from God. We're inviting God into our prayer. Shema Kolenu may be the most poignant words that we speak when we pray, to say Shema Kolenu, God, listen to our prayers. That's literally, we're asking God. One of our prayers is that God should listen to our prayers. Excuse me, Annette, I don't think that the, what am I trying to say? When you focus on someone, it's not focused on me because I'm seeing only Susan. Do you know what I'm talking about? You can highlight, that's what it is. Highlight the speaker. I believe I'm not highlighted.
I see you, Rabbi, I see you.
I
Oh,
see
do?
you.
Okay.
I see you.
Okay.
I saw
Because
you.
I only see Susan. All right, good.
I see you as well, Rabbi.
Yeah.
Okay, good. Thank you. As long as I'm seen. Thank you very much. Sorry for the interruption. So when we ask God to hear our prayer and not forsake us when we're old, this is a really big ask. And for the rabbis, another big part of healthy aging is living with joy. In a book called Wise Aging, Living with Joy, Resilience, and Spirit, written by Rabbi Rachel Cowan. Rachel Cowan is a Jew by choice. She was married to a man named Paul Cowan, who died many years ago, and his father was the producer of that show, The $64,000 Question. And she received an honorary doctorate at my JTS graduation for her work in pastoral care. So Rabbi Cowan says that our stories matter and that we can age well and live well by reframing our personal narratives. So we're going to talk a little about, she writes about Jacob's life story. Jacob's life is filled with drama. His younger years are filled with violent competition with his brother. His parents played favorites, and he was raised by parents who taught him deception. Later, his beloved wife Rachel dies in childbirth. His daughter Dinah is raped. His sons take extreme revenge on the rapist tribe, killing all of the men as they were recovering from circumcision. And 10 of his sons gang up on Joseph, his favorite son, and sell him into slavery. They deceive their father by letting him think that Joseph has been killed by a wild animal, and Jacob never really recovers from this deception. 22 years later, Jacob learns that Joseph is alive and is now the second in command in Egypt. Jacob and his family are invited to settle in Egypt under Joseph's protection. When Joseph introduces his father, Jacob, to Pharaoh, the king asks him, "How many are the years of your life?" And Jacob answers, "The years of my sojourn on earth are 130. Few and hard have been the years of my life, nor do they come up to the lifespans of my fathers, Abraham and Isaac, during their sojourns." Jacob shows no resilience here. He speaks from a place of deep despair. His self-understanding is limited by his suffering, and he's stuck in a story that is all but over. He can't imagine new chapters or new possibilities. Despite being united with his favorite son, he can't recognize the truth that is before him, that his life has been redeemed. We all know that life can turn in an instant, from good to bad and from bad to good. And maybe we've even experienced this change in fortune in our own lives. And with the perspective of distance, that is, with the perspective of age, we can reframe our life and soften our narrative. When we open our hearts and find that our narrative can soften, when we do life review and life reflection, this allows us to change course, to forgive people who may have wronged us, to start new chapters, and to realize that new chapters and possibilities are possible in our life. I know that I only was ordained 4 years ago because in my middle age, I decided I wanted to go to rabbinical school. Annette became Dr. Annette Castle only 3 years ago because she decided to go back and get her DHL in Bible. There are second chapters, and those second chapters can be sources of joy for us. But in addition to the joy, we also need to have gratitude. Rabbi Mordechai Yosef Leiner, who was the Radziner Rebbe in Eastern Europe, wrote that one who crosses the sea and survives a storm thanks God. Why not thank God when there is no storm? One who survives an illness thanks God. Why not thank the one who escapes? Why not the one who escapes illness altogether? Too often we forget about our daily blessings. It's easy to feel gratitude to God when we've just had a near miss or when the medical report comes back that everything is okay. But what about feeling gratitude when life is humming along? Sometimes it's the gratitude for the small things in life that gives us a healthy perspective and can help us age well. Psalm 30, which we say every single day in Shacharit, 365 days a year, is a psalm, one of my favorite psalms and prayers in the daily service. You've turned my lament into dancing. You undid my sackcloth and girded me with joy. Every day when I say this prayer, I think of all the hard times that I've been through, and I feel grateful that God was with me and helped me through those challenges. And as we said before, life can change on a dime in both directions. So when things feel like they're not going well, we can try to hang on and hope that God will change our fortunes. Last week, as you may recall, I mentioned Rav Nachman of Breslov. who the head of the Breslov Hasidim, who lived in the 1800s, and he struggled throughout his life with depression, and he died at age 38. And he wrote so much about aging, which is amazing because he died when he was 38 years old. Yet even despite his depression, his primary teachings were about joy, and he believed that the greater our capacity for joy, the more we're able to hold balance and soften our sadness with compassion, allowing our sadness to dissolve into a largest perspective on life. And Rabbi Nachman of Breslov wrote, regarding joy, a parable. Sometimes when people are happy and dancing, they grab hold of somebody who is standing outside, being sad and melancholy, forcing him to join in the circle of dancers, and making him rejoice with them. And so it is with joy. When a person is happy, the melancholy and suffering are pushed off to the side, but the higher way is to struggle and pursue the sadness, to bring it into joy in such a way that melancholy itself is transformed into gladness, so that all sufferings become joy. That's the way it is when you really enter into joy. The elation is so great that you change all your worry and sadness into joy. You grab hold of that melancholy and force it into the circle. I just thought this was very powerful, especially written by a man who at the time was probably in his 30s. And maybe you've experienced that feeling when you're at a simcha and the hora, the circle dancing starts, and maybe sometimes you're just not in the mood, but then someone puts out their hand, inviting you into the circle, and you just sort of get swept up into it, and you allow the joy to emerge. And that's what Rav Nachman was referring to struggle with our demons and to try to locate the joy in order to live a healthy life. And part of healthy living and healthy aging with the rabbis is talking about and accepting that death is part of life and will eventually come for all of us. And despite that knowledge, or maybe because of that knowledge, Jews always say l'chaim. We're always wishing each other l'chaim. And I didn't write this source down, but in Deuteronomy 30, chapter 19, God says, I've set before you life and death, blessing and curse. Therefore, choose life. Uvacharta b'chayim. Choose life that both you and your descendants might live. So let's look at a few sources that speak to how we hold on to life with all we've got. In the Talmud, Rav Nachman appeared to Rava in a dream, right? And Rav Nachman had already passed away. And Rava asked him, was death painful? And Rav Nachman replied, it was like pulling a hair being drawn from milk, right? It was like nothing at all. But if the Holy One were to say to me, go to that world and be as you were before, I would not want that. Fear of death is so great. So here the rabbinic imagination is that for many people, the fear of dying is what impinges on living a spiritually and emotionally healthy life. And this is illustrated in a beautiful story from the Hasidic masters. Yosef was desperately poor, and his aging body hurt every time he bent down to pick up another twig or scrap of wood. In fact, his body hurt all the time, but bending, lifting, and carrying were his only means of livelihood. Oh God, he moaned, I can't do this any longer. What kind of life is this? Take me, I'm ready. One day, as he was loading a larger than usual piece of wood into his sack, the sack ripped, and all that he had gathered lay scattered on the ground. God, he shouted, I told you I've had enough of this wretched life. Take me away from this pointless life. Let me die. Suddenly, the angel of death appeared before him. You called for me? Yes, said Yosef in a quivering voice. There was a long voice before he spoke again. I was wondering whether you could help me pick up all these sticks. No matter how bad it got, Yosef still chose life. Uvacharta v'chayim. Last week, we talked about Abraham and his attitude toward aging. And in this last source, we have a midrash about Moshe. Moshe, as Annette mentioned earlier, lived to be 120, which was the number of years given in the Torah for a complete lifespan, and which is why on people's birthday, we wish them you should live until 120. But even Moshe, who was as close to God as any human being ever was, didn't want to give up on life. God was saying, come and be with me. It's your time, Moshe. And Moshe was fighting him tooth and nail. in an amazing book called This is Real and You Are Completely Unprepared. It takes us on a spiritual journey from Tisha B'Av through the month of Elul, the high holidays and the holiday of Sukkot. And I've been wanting to teach from this book, maybe in the late summer and the early fall, before Rosh Hashanah, I'll do some teaching from it. But this next source talks about Moshe and that moment that God said it's time to go and how Moshe reacted to God. When Moshe realizes that the decree of death had been sealed against him, he utters more than 1,500 prayers. He draws a circle around himself, stands at the center, and proclaims, "I will not move from this spot until the judgment against me is suspended." God promptly ordered every gate in heaven locked, lest Moshe's prayers find an opening. The prayers are fruitless in the end, and when Moshe sees this, he begs heaven and earth, the sun and the moon, the stars and the planets, the mountains and the rivers, and finally the sea itself to intercede for him to no avail. He actually goes to each one of these things and he asks them to pray on his behalf, and they all say, "We can't pray on your behalf. We have to take care of ourselves." So God asks, "Why are you so aggrieved at your impending death?" And Moshe answers, "I am afraid of the sword of the angel of death, the pain of death itself." And God replies, "If that's the reason, then don't worry. I won't deliver you to the angel of death." But Moshe still clings desperately to life. A few hours before his death, God says to him, "How long will you endeavor in vain to avert your death? You have only 3 hours to live. Better make use of them." But Moshe bargains on furiously. "Let me live on the wrong side of the Jordan," he begs. "Let me live someplace different altogether. Let me live on as a beast in the field or a bird in the sky." "Now you have only 1 hour, says God. "Now you only have a few minutes." This midrash is teaching us that a big part of healthy aging is knowing that in the end, in the natural course of things, we can never know when our last moment will be. And the rabbis are teaching us, don't waste the time you have worrying about the time you won't have. This is what the rabbis imagine that God is teaching Moshe in his last minutes on earth. Live every moment as fully as you can, with meaning, with intention, with joy, resilience, and spirit. God tells us, "I've given you the choice between life and death, ubacharta v'chayim, therefore choose life." Healthy aging is about living with joy, resilience, and spirit, and about choosing life. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you for being here for these 2 sessions. You know that this is Dr. Annette Castle and Friends, and I was her friend last week and this week, but I will not be here next week and the week after. Her other friend, Rabbi Mishkin, will be here because my daughter is getting married, and I just have an awful lot to do before that. She's getting married right in the middle of the 3rd class and the 4th class. So I just wanted to thank Annette for inviting me to be part of this endeavor. It's really been a pleasure to work with you and with Susan. I know I learned a lot preparing for this, and I know you have too. And I would like to, open it up for any questions. Or Annette, you can.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you very much for your very thoughtful and thought-provoking presentation, and Mazel Tov. And I hope it's a wonderful wedding, as I'm sure we all do. And just to kind of sum up, I think that what each of us has presented is that each of us as individuals, whether we're thinking about our own lives or we're thinking about the lives of people we love or the people that we spend a great deal of time with, have to appreciate every moment and do the things we can to make us as healthy as possible as we go forward and inevitably reach inevitably move forward. So any questions from anybody? No? Well, okay, I guess we ran the gamut. Anyway, I thank you all, and I hope that you appreciated this. Next week, we're going to be talking about family and friends as related to older adults, older people. I think it's a topic that again, that we can relate to, and I'll be finding some appropriate quotes from the Bible, some appropriate stories. Susan, again, will be bringing in the modern view, and next week, Rabbi Mishkin will bring in the rabbinic views. So I thank you for being here, and I can't believe we actually timed it well. That's a big effort with 3 people, but we did it. And I wish you all a very good evening.